in a very objective way. So today we have the AG in presence, and the agenda is in front of us. And in terms of our agenda, those are the two critical areas that we are meeting on today. We are going to finish up just getting a briefing on the area that relates to the trip which we are intending to undertake to Canada. Welcome, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I see that the meeting has attracted some interest from the press, and that way everybody present in the platform is more than welcome. Mr. Dumezo, do you have anything that you want to bring to our attention before we start the meeting?
Good afternoon, Chair, and good afternoon to everyone. We haven't received any apology, Chair, from the side of members. I assume that also includes the office of the AG. And as I've already indicated to you earlier, that the delegation have been told that will be led by the AG. Thank you, Chairperson.
No, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Thanks to the AG for honoring the meeting. I know for a fact that now is involved in a number of consultations looking into the stakeholders which are being mobilized around the fulfillment of what the office has designed as the accountability related framework, which look into the ecosystem in as far as the success of ease of governance and their financial prudence are concerned. So welcome, AG. Can I give over to you based on the first item, which relates to the dispute resolution mechanism. AG?
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair.
Yes. Chairperson, it's Honorable Matafa.
Yes,
my apologies for watching in. Thank you, Chair. If you allow me, I see the agenda omitted the item of apologies. I'm not sure if whether would you want us to table those that we have received for purpose of our records.
No, that's why I've asked Mr. Dumezo to make that. Maybe you were off the system. What I has
it's Friday, Chair. You must forgive him. Friday.
Forgiven. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you. If it's covered, my apologies, Chair. My network is not stable today.
Okay, you are somewhat patent. Thanks so much. AG.
Okay. Thank you very much, Honorable Chair, and thank you to the honourable members for giving us this opportunity to update you on these two topics. With me this afternoon are members of Team AGSA, led by the Deputy Auditor-General, who's on the call. Bongi Ngoma is one of the heads of audit. She's responsible for PFMA, and she's on the call. The other head of audit, Mawatu, is busy with stakeholder engagements on the MFMA audit, but amongst us, I think we have enough members of Team AGSA to be able to engage the committee as necessary. I'll start with the dispute resolution mechanism, and then I'll hand back to you, Chair, before we enter into the readiness for the local government audit report tabling. This is just a reminder to make sure that we work together with the committee in terms of what processes we have for resolving audit disputes as and when they arise, what changes we've made in the recent period, and how we are experiencing those. I think just to highlight that, which is on the next slide, that the AGSA audits against standards and frameworks that are determined by the National Treasury in terms of Section 216 of the Constitution. So they're a firm part of this ecosystem that's on the screen there. The AGSA confirms whether auditees have complied with these standards in the course of running their affairs and reporting on how they've managed public funds through their financial statements and performance reports. Audit pushbacks have been a feature of our work for a number of years now, and disputes are driven mostly by either legal interpretation differences around contracts or legislation or even regulations, as well as the interpretation of accounting standards. And we welcome those debates with our auditees, because I always say there's nothing worse than auditing and the people who are responsible for that institution don't take much of an interest on the outcome of the audit. If they take an interest in the specific outcome and the specific details in the audit report, there's a higher likelihood that they'll attend to the final report and our recommendations. So we welcome those debates. Where auditees desire to obtain a clean audit, we also find that in some instances, they'll challenge us on material findings that we raise. And again, it's also an opportunity for us to recognize and acknowledge that it is auditees that actually care about the audit outcomes and want to improve the lot of their institution. In the past, between the AGSA and the National Treasury, specifically working with the Office of the Auditor-General, we established a dispute resolution mechanism which saw these disputes, especially on accounting matters and on Treasury regulation issues, being dealt with between AGSA and the Office of the Accountant-General. When there was a technical dispute on matters of judgment or even on interpretation, we would sit together with the OAG and arrive at a view. And if we differed between the two of us, we would seek the help of legal counsel just to get to a point where there's agreement between us as the two institutions, and then we would finalize the conclusions from an audit point of view. Now, this process served us for some time. However, we started to find that the disputes themselves were becoming more and more complex. And ideally, if you can move to the next slide, that would help, please. The disputes themselves were becoming more and more complex. The nature of the matters we were dealing with were legal, they were accounting, they were auditing, and it needed us to broaden how we were applying ourselves to resolving these pushbacks. Another feature of what we were experiencing at the time was that we found that our ability to conclude and resolve these disputes on time, so that we don't compromise the accountability process by finalizing our audits too late, that ability was being diminished. The process of closing out on these audit disputes was taking much too long. And if you consider some of the long outstanding audits that are there because of audit disputes, that's a feature of that old process, such as the Road Accident Fund, as well as the National Treasury, especially around the IFMS. Both of those disputes found themselves still in the auspices of the old dispute resolution process, which had those complexities and limitations that I've just spoken of. We identified that there was a concern amongst our auditees that they viewed the process where the AGSA and the OAG agree between themselves and finalize a matter as being limited in terms of giving them access to be heard. And they were concerned that the process was perhaps not being fair to them because they didn't have a chance to put their case across. And that was a feature in the dispute with the Western Cape Department of Agriculture, which ended up going to court because once the AG and the National Treasury had agreed on a particular position on the issue, there was no other place for the department to take the dispute, so it ended up in court, which is not the appropriate forum for dealing with accounting and auditing matters. And not only does it delay the process, but it's unlikely to really result in the type of conclusions that support accountability and transparency. One of the things we've experienced is that because there aren't too many audit matters or audit processes and accounting issues that end up in the courts, the relying on the courts then just doesn't become the best option in terms of resolving these matters. Okay. Another thing we wanted to deal with in terms of our policy, we had our policy sitting as part of the complaints policy, which deals with different categories and different types of complaints. And as a result, the stakeholders, especially our external stakeholders, had to muddle through different policies to get a sense of how to deal with a dispute. So we needed to rather find a standalone policy that would allow transparency and clarity and predictability on how an audit dispute would be dealt with internally and externally. Now, on the next slide, we set out some of the key things around what we wanted to achieve. We wanted to make sure that our policy, as I said, dealt with all of the audit disputes, including the ones that were related to MIs. So we were anticipating we would have an increase in the number of disputes. We knew we would have to deal with greater complexity. We knew we wanted to still sort out the matter on timelines. And we also saw it as an opportunity to provide greater leadership visibility within the AGSA in resolving these conflicts. And so when we approached SCOAG late last year, in the latter part of last year, to talk about our proposals and our thoughts around the amendments to the dispute resolution process, it was to try and achieve all of those key objectives. And that was what we spoke about. You remember, we even raised the idea that the responsibility for dealing with the dispute still rests with the engagement manager. That is the senior manager that I've designated and authorized to deal with a particular audit from start to finish. And they have the authority to sign off on the audit based on our standards. They still maintain the primary responsibility for navigating and concluding on disputes. But we know that sometimes, people don't find each other. And that's why we've created another layer where we have a head of portfolio that can look at the matter. So stage 2, we're still within AGSA, but that person is not involved in the audit, and they're able to apply their mind somewhat independent of the auditors, but also listen to both sides. And if that particular next tier is not listened to, or is not the process is not conclusive, the auditee has an opportunity to still raise it with another layer of leadership, which I'll go through in a moment, which is the head of audit. And as I said, this policy is a standalone one, which is clearly articulated and is available for any stakeholders to access at any given time. In developing, which is on the next slide, in developing our revised audit dispute resolution mechanism, we established the policy principles, which I've just spoken about. We then went to seek external legal opinion on these principles. We did some benchmarking with our global peers. We engaged the National Treasury and the Accounting Standards Board around what we wanted to achieve. And then we drafted our policy, which we then took through the internal processes and ultimately coming to consult with SCOAG as the Public Audit Act requires me to do. And this we did in October of 2022. And ultimately, I approved the policy to be effected from the 1st of November 2022. So apologies, that should say 2022, not 2023. So it really applies for the first time on the MFMA audits of 2022. And in the implementation phase, we went on a roadshow internally, made sure our internal stakeholders know what to expect. We equipped them with information to go and share with external stakeholders and their auditees. We also went to engage with our own stakeholders, the National Treasury, the Accounting Standards Board. We also engaged with provincial treasuries. We issued letters to all of our auditees so that there was an understanding of what this policy actually entails. Like anything new, we accept that this work of awareness will have to continue for a while until the policy is well understood and people have actually tested it somewhat. What the process looks like now is that we've shaped it so that it does safeguard the independence of the AGSA. We are still responsible for arriving at the final conclusion and getting to our own view as giving an expert opinion on our audits. One of the things that comes up often is some of the auditees seeking a mediation as a potential audit dispute resolution. And what we are clear about is the dispute resolution process has been set out so that it is fair, it's predictable, it gives multiple opportunities for the matter to be heard. It allows for the AGSA to benefit from the input of external stakeholders, whether it's the National Treasury, whether it's the ASB, whether it's legal experts, and other experts that we will select, tax experts, for example, based on the matter at hand. But what we cannot do, and this is what something we are quite clear about, having looked at the provisions of the Constitution, having looked at the Public Audit Act, and also having benchmarked with our global peers. What we cannot do is have the audit conclusion subjected to a mediation process. If we refer an audit dispute to a mediator, that would really be the AG saying we are submitting the lawfulness and correctness of our audit findings to a process of negotiation, of consensus seeking, and ultimately of arriving at a compromise, which really runs in contradiction to what the audit outcome should be, which is really what it should be by its nature, is that it is an independent, objective assessment and conclusion by an expert of the financial affairs of an auditee. And so that expert opinion must be arrived at having listened to every voice as necessary, but that conclusion must still be one that's made by the AG. So we can't subject our audit process to mediation or to bargaining or negotiation. It doesn't mean we don't have a responsibility to deal with disputes properly, and that's one of the reasons why we've set out this process. It doesn't mean that we don't want to listen to people or make sure they are heard in a fair and transparent and predictable way. That's why we set out this process. What it does mean, though, is that at the end of the day, the AG has to arrive at that conclusion. We've also tried hard to make sure that this process limits the need for people to go to court, and hence the multiple opportunities for the matters to be dealt with. Unfortunately, one can't close the door on people going to court. It's a natural order of things, so they will probably continue to seek a judicial review. But we think that this process, having worked on it in the way that we have, does insulate the processes from the need of people to do so. I think on the next slide, we then set out the specific processes. Just to reiterate, the engagement manager remains firmly in control of the process until they get to a point where they cannot resolve the issue. The auditee, if the auditee is still dissatisfied that this matter is not dealt with appropriately, they will be able to seek the second tier of engagement, which is then led by the head of portfolio. And the heads of portfolio are pretty senior, seasoned auditors within our environment with tremendous responsibility in their hands. And they will be able to bring on board the expertise internally and perhaps even externally, depending on the matter at hand, so that they can arrive at yet another view, having listened to both sides. And what this process does, it allows the auditee to actually be heard, which is something that called for. The next layer of the next tier is then available if there's still disagreement, which is then the heads of audit who will engage with this process to a point where they can arrive at a conclusion. And we are having some practice of that, in that there is a dispute underway, which one of the heads of audit is actually dealing with directly on the MFMA cycle. And in fact, even on the PFMA cycle, there's a matter that we've now brought into that space. Just by way of example, there are some disputes which, as I say, are able to be dealt with in the context of the specific audit and the specific business unit. And when that happens, then the matter is dealt with. But if people are unhappy or there's still some concern, it can move to tier 1, it can move to tier 2, which then allows visibility of leadership. It gives a sense of fairness. And it also even allows us as the AGSA to have multiple opportunities to apply our minds outside of the heat of the audit process, and also get the benefit of input from other players. One of the concerns that some people have raised is that where's the role of the National Treasury? And we've been at pains to say the National Treasury remains firmly a part of this journey, either at tier 1. In fact, often at engagement manager level, they're a part of it. If not, at tier 1, the head of portfolio would have every opportunity to engage with the National Treasury. And even at tier 2, if indeed the matter requires it to be so, there will be an engagement with the National Treasury. However, what we've done is allow for complexity. What we've done also is allow for the AGSA to run the process to its logical conclusion. Then the last point I wanted to raise in terms of my role in all of this, because I've delegated the powers to ultimately conclude on these disputes to the heads of audit, who are very senior leaders in our environment. And there would be, an important tier in closing the matters. I would get involved at the point that the matter now starts to want to go to court. and I would then get involved in a way that starts to deal with the specifics in that way. We believe that this is the best way for us to refresh how we deal with audit disputes. And as I say, it's already being put into practice. As things stand, and no doubt you're curious about to what extent we are dealing with audit disputes. As you know, we conduct over 1,000 audits every single year. So if you look at the municipalities, there are 257 that we report on, but that excludes often the municipal entities, which are part of the audit cycle. So if you add those as well as the PFMA audits, we really get to a figure of just about 1,000 audits that the AGSA conducts every single year. Out of those, we're dealing with a total of 9 disputes. So whilst audit disputes are noisy and they take up a lot of time and they generate significant interest, it's not something that applies across the board. In most of the instances of our audits, we're able to conclude the audits and mostly on time, and we're able to move on. But we do have this process available for those minority of instances. What we've also done, just in terms of making sure that we track how these things are being dealt with, we do have an internal register that tracks how each and every one of these disputes is being handled. And that register is something I have visibility of on a regular basis. And we're able to support each other internally on making sure that disputes get the attention that they deserve. There are a few disputes, as I said, in the MFMA cycle that we're busy dealing with, and they're in different spaces. Some are already concluded, but others are still in a space. There's a particular municipality whose matter is still being dealt with at the head of audit level. And then at PFMA, we're also now starting to pick up disputes that we're wanting to take through this process. There are a couple of instances where we've been able to dispense with the desire of people to go to court. Not that we strong arm them or anything like that, but I think because the need for them to do so is not there anymore because they have a fair hearing in their experience. Mr. Chairman, Honorable Chair, this is the feedback I wanted to share with the committee, especially given that it was a few months ago that we engaged on our intentions on this new policy. We thought it would be fair to give you feedback on what we've done with it and how we're experiencing it as things go for the moment. Thank you very much. May I hand back to you, Honorable Chair?
Thank you very much, AG, on the areas that you have covered as far as the dispute resolution is concerned, which is a very critical instrument for a sense of the stable, some form of predictability of audit outcomes and the level which I seek to create a standard form around such. If honorable members would appreciate, the value of what you are doing is to assert the key principles as outlined in section 188 of the Constitution, the chapter 9 of that Constitution, where on the area that relates to the Auditor-General, that it starts by no.
It's
Who's Scott?
Oh, sorry.
Mute. Okay. The critical assertion, which is constitutional based, which must be always emphasized, that it's not a matter of choice. It's not a matter of choice that you must engage in audits, and you must engage on those audits. You must report on those audits. That's a constitutional injunction, which must always be observed by the Office of the Auditor-General and those who are audited by the Office of the Auditor-General. And the point which we have highlighted, which is very critical, is that it is the Auditor-General of South Africa who must do finalize and somewhat issue a report on the specificity of that kind of an audit. It's an instruction of the Constitution. So nobody else, so that responsibility doesn't lie anywhere else except for in the office of the Auditor-General. So this mechanism assists just to create some kind of a platform to make people understand, to agree on matters, and to make other things sing quite appropriately. So it might be as well good if you could preface this kind of a thing which relates to establish that mechanism, that anything that comes away from this would be somewhat away from what the Constitution has sought to achieve based on Section 188. Over to you, colleagues. That's the presentation by the AG, which I think is exactly what we wanted, based on the policy which we dealt with late last year. Are there any comments? There's one, and Honorable Singh. The second one is Honorable Flonyane. So far, that the two colleagues who are going to comment on the AGs. Honorable Singh.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, dear colleagues, AG, and your team, and everybody else that's present. Certainly, we welcome the support and the procedures that you've outlined. And I note, AG, that you've looked at international examples. And now, another organization that comes to mind when disputes arise is SARS, Revenue Services. Have you looked at SARS and how they deal with disputes that may arise? And I know there would be many disputes there. So it's the first one. I think it's also pleasing to note that there are only 9 disputes. But what would be the longest period that a dispute? You mentioned the Department of Agriculture, which I recall, and the Road Accident Fund. But what would be the longest time to resolve the disputes? And lastly, just as a comment, I would have thought that you would get disputes and courts when certificates of debt are issued. What's happening in that terrain, Chair, if I may also ask, with certificates of debt? How are we doing in that space with the number of certificates issued and the number of positive responses and actions that are being taken? Thank you.
Thanks, Honorable Singh. AG.
Thank you, Honorable Singh, and thank you, Chair. The benchmarking with SARS, no, we haven't done that. And I think we can happily look at that in terms of the processes that they follow. What we did was we focused on our global peers in terms of the specific mandate on audit. But thank you for that lead. We'll look at that and see if there's anything we want to adopt from there. The longest period, RAF has run for a very long time. And if you look at the National Treasury one, the story on IFMS has been quite long and noisy. But I think of both of them, RAF is probably the one that has run the longest, in that the dispute started when they submitted their financials for 2021, and we raised the matters and we couldn't reach agreement with them. Instead of signing off at the end of July 2021, we allowed the engagements between RAF, ourselves, as well as the OAG, which is the process that was meant to be followed at that time, being the process, the dispute resolution process that was in motion at the time. You may recall that we only signed off the audit of RAF in the beginning of December 2021. And that was mainly because only then did we get some sense of where the OAG stood on the matter. So that ran quite a long time. And then unfortunately, after we issued the audit report, the institution went to court, and the matter is still in court, as you might know. However, in the meantime, we've been quite vigilant to indicate that our constitutional obligations as an office remain quite important to uphold. And so the judicial review process does not suspend the AG's responsibility to fulfill her constitutional mandate. So we've finished the audit, tabled the audit report for 21, and now we're doing the same thing for 2022. And now we're running into the year end for 2023 because the year is finished, ended in March 2023. The submissions for financials is due May 2023, so in a few days' time, on the 31st. And so we will have to engage in the audit process. The matter for the judicial review has been set down in the High Court for October. Our stance, based on the legal advice as well as the our interpretation of what the constitutional obligations of the AG are, our stance remains that we must complete the audit and we must submit the annual report and the audit report, or the audit report must still reach Parliament for oversight processes by the 30th of September, as the law requires, whilst the judicial review process is still in motion. So that one has probably run the longest, Honourable Singh. The COD, yes, you would have thought that the matters around COD are the ones that increase the extent and the complexity and the pace of these disputes. And that's going to come. We've issued a notification for a certificate of debt to one of the municipalities. And I think we indicated this when we issued the MFMA report last year to say which specific municipality we were concerned about. We've issued that notice, and they've made it clear that they will be taking us on legally as and when we pursue issuing the certificate of debt. But that's just in one instance. Generally, most accounting officers have taken on our MIs. They've implemented our recommendations. They have taken the notifications we've issued. They have come back with responses that indicate the action that they're wanting to take, and we've given them the space to take that action. So the short answer to what our experiences are on the MIs is that in the majority of instances, accounting officers are responding in the way that we would expect. They're taking the type of action we would anticipate. If not, they're at least undertaking to do so, and we're giving the opportunity for them to do so. And so we haven't had any legal threats or legal challenges other than where we've issued the notice for a certificate of debt. I hope I've answered the questions, Honourable Singh. Back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, AG.
Thank you, AG. Honourable Flanyane.
No, thank you, Chair. Firstly, let me welcome the presentation, and as usual, it was on point and well presented. Thank you so much to the Office of the AG. Chair, I just have, maybe I'm a little bit confused, but I just want to understand something, and maybe if it's possible, if the AG can explain this into a simplest manner so that we're able to also explain these things to our own people. The issues of the disputes, AG, I just wanted to understand that if you had to find this, I understand all the layers that have been put in place in order to make sure that both the auditor and the auditee are satisfied in the end of the day. But I just want to understand if it was a municipality, who is going to be the final person to deal with the issues of the disputes? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Flanyane. AG.
Thank you, Honourable Flanyane. Thank you, Honourable Chair. It would be the head of audit. It would be the head of audit. That same process would be followed, Honourable Flanyane, where the auditor that's been designated and authorized by me to sign off on that audit has a space to deal with the matter. If there is still disagreement, it'll go to the head of portfolio, who would deal with it. Between the head of portfolio and the engagement manager, there's the business unit leader, who will be the leader of the province. So in any province, we've got a provincial business executive or business unit leader. They are the person that represents me in that province. They would have the opportunity to engage with the matter, but outside of the BU, it would go to the head of portfolio. Every business unit leader reports to one head of portfolio, and that head of portfolio would engage with the matter. And then if there's still disagreement, it'll go to the head of audit. In that instance, where it's a municipality, it'll go to the head of audit responsible for local government, who at this stage is Mabatu Sitikelo. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Honourable Fanyan.
Thank you, AG. Thanks, Honourable Fanyan and Honourable Singh, for the questions and comments that you have made. It's so clear now that indeed the Office of the Auditor-General should be geared up in as far as such modalities are concerned. It's a matter of preparedness and provide the necessary capacity on the matters which are driven mainly by MIs. It's somewhat could be inevitable that some areas might indeed end up being looked into in terms of areas of interpretation or through the avoidance of such issuances might end up needing that kind of intervention one way or the other, as people would want to run away from accountability. So, Honourable Singh, I think you are raising a very important matter which needs some form of attention going forward in terms of readiness. But I think let's thank AG and the office around the areas that they have somewhat covered. It looks like things are clearer, and there's some form of predictability based on the defined lines where these mediated angles would come up. And I hope it doesn't mean that the AG and their team would have to flex up around those matters. That's why I thought that let me preface the earlier engagement based on the Constitution, so that whatever is happening, we don't throw the book away. We must be able to lead based on the book in as far as fulfillment of areas of constitutionality is concerned. So thank you very much, AG. Thanks for that kind of information going forward. So if colleagues would agree, let's go to the next item, which relates to MFMA its readiness of the Office of Auditor-General in terms of the actual tabling. Over to AG.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. Thank you for taking an interest in ensuring that you know exactly how we are tracking as we head towards the tabling of the local government audits next week. I want to confirm to the committee that the 2022 audits for local government have been completed. The relevant annual reports have been tabled in those councils, and the councils themselves have been engaged thoroughly on the audit outcomes. I've gone to visit each and every one of the provinces. There I've met with the provincial executive and the legislature to take them through the outcomes and to understand how they see things. We've also, having consolidated the information, met with the national departments responsible for parts of the ecosystem of local government, specifically COGTA and Provincial Treasury, and then we've also gone to the Cabinet. We're still in the process of engaging other stakeholders, SALGA, such as SALGA, whom we met today, and others. The general report is being finalized and will indeed be ready for tabling, which is scheduled for next week, Wednesday, with yourselves. I want to then take the time to indicate that the delays we had in the previous period, which really was still an overhang of the COVID-related delays, that is now out of the system at AGSA. And I want to credit the members of Team AGSA for their hard work in getting to a point where we've been able to finalize those audits. I think the best way to give you some insight on how we've handled the audit is probably just to start by giving you a reminder of where we ended things when we met with you last time on the audit outcomes for local government. At the time that we tabled the report, I think just go back to the outcome slide. We had a message for the incoming leadership of local government for their just taken over. And at the time that we met with them and we launched our report, we highlighted that the preceding administration of local government had left things worse off than how they'd found them in local government. And so we encouraged the incoming leadership to focus on implementing the key improvements that were necessary to turn the situation around. We highlighted that clean audits were still important because a clean audit really denotes an auditee that has got the key controls necessary to at least put financial management at the level that is required, such that they ultimately produce credible financial statements. It's a clean auditee is also one where they've got a handle on their performance planning, on their performance monitoring, and their performance reporting. And then also somebody gets a clean audit when they've got the disciplines, the procedures, and the policies that support compliance with the rule of law. So when we talk about a clean audit, we've been highlighting the importance of still prioritizing the journey towards clean audits, because that's how the strength of a public institution is guaranteed. It might not guarantee ongoing performance in all areas, but a clean audit is one where we are able to denote that that particular auditee has got the key controls in place. So at the time, there were 41 clean audits, and then we also talked about the 100 audits that were unqualified. And then what we did say at the time, we said, you've got 141 being the 100 and the 41 being the ones where they've been able to publish credible financial statements, which accounts for just over half the municipalities. But then we highlighted that the quality of financial statements being submitted was still quite poor, which meant that financial management disciplines were not firm. We even said that if we had stopped auditing at the point that the financials were submitted, we would have only had 25% instead of more than 50% having credible financial statements tabled. We also talked about how it was important for us all not to become complacent around that 100 in the unqualified space. The tendency tends to be that when somebody has an unqualified opinion on financial statements, they stop there. They don't worry enough about performance information. They don't worry enough about the compliance matters. And so what then happens is you've got these institutions that are actually consistently weakening because the financial and performance management processes are not there. The internal controls are not being tightened. Performance is not the order of the day. And that's one of the reasons why you have this dissonance between an unqualified audit opinion on financials and what happens on the ground. And we did say that it was important to move a number of those municipalities out of this complacency in the yellow zone. We highlighted the problems around the qualified space and highlighted the issues around what it is that leads to audit qualifications, and indicated that it was important for local government to deal with financial management disciplines, skills, capacity, disciplines, monitoring, oversight, and consequence management. At the time, you might remember that we talked a lot about the disclaimers of audit opinions and how undesirable those were. And we highlighted the importance of everybody in the ecosystem, ensuring that they support the struggling municipalities to move out of the disclaimer zone. And then at the time, we also had 9 audits outstanding, and we talked about how there were a number of instances where municipalities were submitting financials late or not submitting at all, and especially in the Free State, you may recall. Subsequent to that report being tabled, a number of those financial statements have been submitted. So you'll see in the bottom row there that we've got a total of 3 financial statements now outstanding as we sit for 2021. It's because we've continued to audit. As and when the submissions came, we've continued to audit. So 6 submissions came through. 1 was a disclaimer and 5 were qualified. And we've been able to continue to finish up those audits. So it's been encouraging to see how, having raised the alarm around the need for the ecosystem of accountability to push back on these late submissions or non-submissions, there's been some activity in that regard. And I think it's important for us to indicate to the honourable members of SCOEC that we were able to use our MI instrument to drive this as well. When we saw these late or non-submissions, we actually issued material irregularities because we took the view that not submitting financial statements is not only a non-compliance with the specific provisions of MFMA, but it's also causing harm to the institution because there isn't the level of accountability and transparency that should be the order of the day, and that's necessary if the institution is to be built. So we said, you are weakening the institution, you are harming the institution by not submitting financial statements. And that message has been heeded, and that accounts for much improved submissions, which have affected the 2021 final outcomes, and hence the update on that last row. And in fact, if we look at 2022, what you'll see when we table the outcomes on Wednesday is that there have been even the old sets of financials being submitted, especially in the Free State. So we're getting that backlog out of the system, and we're able to at least get the history sorted out, and we're able to move forward. The 3 that remain outstanding now for 2021, which is the blue on that bottom slide, are in the Free State as well, Masilonyana, Kopano, and Malujapofu. And those ones we are still continuing to work with together with the provincial government to get them to submit so that we can move in the right direction. I also want to talk about the MIs around the disclaimers. You might recall that when we did the report for local government last year, not only did we provide insight on what the problems are within a disclaimer and said, we've got to move beyond the technical definition of what a disclaimer is, and let's show you what happens at a municipality with a disclaimer. Let's give you insight on why it's important to sort out disclaimers. And then we also issued MIs because we took the view that a repeat disclaimer municipality is one where there is harm to the institution at the very least, and often harm to the public. So we issued those MIs, and the pleasing response from provincial governments, especially in the Northwest, as well as the institutions themselves, has been that we've been able to reduce the number of disclaimers this time around because of that action. So we would want to continue to use our instrument, and whether it's insight, whether it's influence, but also the enforcement, so that we can drive the right behaviors and choices by those that run public institutions. When we did, which is the next slide now, the messages that we shared with the incoming leadership, when we said to them, there's been no improvement for the previous 5 years, let's make sure that you start to move things in the right direction. We talked about the need for them to ensure that they settle down quickly, stabilize the political leadership at the municipality, stabilize and capacitate the administration in a municipality, and ensure that they set a tone about what's tolerable in that municipality. Hire for competence, but also hire for integrity and ethical conduct, and set the tone about what's tolerable. So that when things go wrong, you act quickly, so that you start to shift the culture towards one where there are fewer accountability failures. We also said to the incoming leadership, do prioritize setting a culture where financial management becomes a key priority for all leaders in the institution. They've got to understand that dealing with public funds brings about a set of responsibilities that must not be ignored. And we talked about how it was important for them to instill the disciplines as well as the tone that would support that. And we also raised matters around regular credible information on financial performance and as well as performance against the service delivery objectives. So those are the messages we highlighted for the incoming leadership. And we talked to the new councillors, whether they were speakers or the members of MPAC, the mayors. And then we also started a journey of ensuring that we talk to other players in the ecosystem to say, let's make sure that the areas we are raising do get attention. Our message last year, which is the next slide, which you'll remember, dealt with financial management, and we highlighted that there is significant investment in financial management capabilities within local government, whether in terms of hiring people in finance functions, whether it's also in terms of making sure that internal audit function is fully staffed, as well as audit committee is operational. And we said that despite this investment, plus the ongoing use of consultants and the support from national and provincial government, there was still little movement in dealing with the basic disciplines. And we caution that the ongoing reliance on these short-term solutions, especially from consultants, as well as the support from a national and provincial government, that reliance should not come at the cost of taking the time to build the internal controls. And we highlighted that we were not yet seeing it and that it needed to become something that was a priority. And hence, we said that if that attention is not brought to bear, the issues around the quality of financials will keep showing up, and it will keep highlighting for us that the controls around in-year reporting, ongoing management, ongoing tracking of how performance is going, how financial resources are being used, those disciplines were not in place. And if that continued, it would lead to worsening financial health of municipalities. It would also lead to ongoing leakage of public funds because these monies were going to be spent in a way that's inconsistent with what had been planned for or what had been promised. And I'm just highlighting these things because when you see our report next week, you'll see that it's a continuation on the work that we did last year. The next slide deals with performance information. I don't intend to go through all of it, but just to say that we have employed our strategy of saying, how do we use the fact that we are auditing, as the law requires, we have to audit performance information, but how do we deepen this work in a way that gives the type of influence, the type of insight that can equip people to drive the improvements that they should? How can we use the information we have to influence different players within a municipality, but also outside of a municipality? Get them to see why this stuff is important and influence the choices they make in a way that's going to support improvements on accountability. So in continuing with this work, we've really deepened our insights. One of the things, and I think Honorable Singh, you'll enjoy this, we've gone and visited 249 infrastructure projects right across the country. And we've been able to send our auditors together with our performance auditors, so the regularity or financial auditors together with our performance auditors, to go and inspect different infrastructure. And they've gone to see wastewater treatment plants, they've gone to see landfill sites, they've gone to look at housing developments, they've gone to look at other infrastructure that may be sitting on the books in that money is being spent, and they're able to correlate that to what they see on the ground. And what that has helped us to do is to generate the type of insights that we're hoping will influence the choices people make, at least in prioritizing the attention to performance information. We remain convinced that if performance information starts to enjoy more attention by those that run government, we're going to have a better likelihood that resources in the hands of institutions will be driven towards what they're supposed to do, because then there'll be a better correlation between what is planned and appropriated for and what is ultimately spent. If planning is attended to, in that the key functions of a municipality are taken account of in the performance information, we have a better chance of that happening. Because last year we said, when we look at the performance information, some of the targets and indicators don't quite give us confidence that they are positioning that municipality for performance. We're also noticing that the performance information doesn't correlate to the budgets and doesn't correlate to the activities on the ground. And so what then tends to happen is that money gets spent and then the impact is very difficult to confirm. So when you see our report next week, I hope that it will convince you that we continue on our journey as AGSA in terms of giving the type of insights that will hopefully influence behavior changes and therefore a culture shift towards better accountability, better performance and transparency, and better input into the ecosystem of accountability by everyone. One of the things that remains quite clear is that the design of performance planning and monitoring and reporting in government is pretty sound, with very clear responsibilities for different players. A municipality, for example, puts their IDP together. That IDP is subjected to a review by the MEC COCTA or his or her department. And then their ASDBIP, which is the annual plan, then gets subjected to a similar process of review. Now, if all of those functions are working properly, there should be little chance for performance information to go ignored or for performance information weaknesses to go unattended. So what we've been able to do is drive messages for what the MECs of COCTA should be dealing with, what the provincial legislatures that oversee those MECs and their departments should be worried about, but also similarly what should be happening within the municipality. The last part on compliance information, when we did our report last year, you'll note that we didn't talk too much about irregular expenditure. And that's on the next slide. And that was quite deliberate because the number for irregular expenditure becomes quite meaningless because so many municipalities are qualified on the number of irregular expenditure. They don't have the discipline to track it properly, so the number becomes something that we can't confirm. But the key insight that we shared last year was about the type of controls, the types of irregularities we were seeing, and the impact that was having. And so we'll continue on that trend in the report that we issue now. Again, it's about saying beyond the headline of this is what irregular expenditure is, we believe as the AGSA, we can provide better insight, better influence to drive behavior changes, and then also use our enforcement tool, which is a slide that's there now. Last year, when we reported to you, we talked about how we had applied our enforcement tool. We had applied it at 94 auditees, and at the time, we had already found 185 MIs. 145 of those MIs, we were able to link to a possible or an already manifested financial loss of 3.9 billion rand. So 145 of those MIs we could link to 3.9 billion rand that was being lost. We don't believe that that's a full extent of what's being lost throughout the system, but certainly is what we have found. And it's something that allows us to have a richer conversation around the impact of the continued non-compliances, the impact of the continued lack of attention to strengthening controls. And then we talked about what we're seeing in terms of how those MRs are being dealt with. In last year's report, we did the stuff about the substantial harm around the disclaimers and the non-submissions, which I've spoken about. So we had issued those MIs and we've seen some impact of those. We also started last year to link substantial harm to the lack of maintenance of infrastructure. This year's report, following that, we've been to 249 sites of infrastructure projects or infrastructure assets. We're able to articulate some very clear insights on what we found and around the impact of project management failures. And so the MIs we've issued are many more around the public harm and the environmental harm associated with the lack of maintenance of key infrastructure projects. And then the report also deals with an update of how we've dealt with the different MIs, much as we did last year. And Honourable Chair and Honourable Members, our intention is to issue the MFMA General Report with yourselves next week, and then subsequent to that, come and deal with the specific MIs in the way that we did for PFMA. We're hoping that allows for a much richer conversation and insight on the specific MIs and the status. But I want to assure the committee that we continue to track these MIs and we continue to drive the enforcement tool as has been the mandate. If we go to slide 21, I just want to highlight, I've got two more slides to go, 21 and then 22. On 21, I bring up the accountability ecosystem again because I just want to report to the honourable members of SCOAG that as the new councils took over, we also played a role in the induction process for the new councillors. And we deemed it important to collaborate with other players in ensuring that our messages and our insights were part of what was being imparted at those induction programs. So the phase one of our engagement with councils was through a partnership with SALGA and COPTA and the treasuries, and we were able to visit each one of the councils. So there was 100% coverage as part of the initial induction, and that happened in October and November 2022. And we covered matters around the AGSA mandate, what we ordered, why we ordered it, how we ordered it. We talked about the importance of the oversight role and the responsibilities that come with it, as well as how we support councils in engaging with those responsibilities. Then we've entered into phase two of the induction process, which every single BU in each of the provinces has been able to select the specific councils that needed particular attention. And they've been able to drive ongoing awareness and induction. And in those sessions, we were able to share with them our insights around this accountability ecosystem and clarifying the different roles. We talked about the Public Audit Act and the MI process and how that can help them as the parties responsible for oversight to drive the type of behaviors that were necessary for us to change the culture in local government. We also dealt with the preventative controls. We introduced the guides that we had published some time ago, and we were able to spend time with those councillors, taking them through how they can use our guide to help them drive oversight conversations. And then we also unpacked the audit outcomes for those specific municipalities. So it was now drilling down to what we wanted those councillors to understand about their respective municipalities. Phase three of our induction and onboarding of councillors will be about driving a reiteration of our messages, because now that they've had their first full year, it's a good time to refresh the training on each of the topics I've just spoken about, and really making sure that we walk with those councillors and we stay with them as they adjust to their different roles. We are clear that one can't do induction once and leave things alone. It's important to drive ongoing refresher engagements with those responsible for oversight. And we've done all of this because we accept that councils have such an important role to play in driving what happens in a municipality. Their role is so critical and their responsibility is so significant that we've got to find ways to support them and not just point fingers at the end of an audit process, but rather use our insights and our influence to get them to feel confident that they're equipped to do their work. In terms of where we are in the work we've done this year for the cycle, the last slide, Honourable Chair, is just to give you a refresher on what the process is, because I think sometimes the office is so busy and you see us in different contexts. You've just been seeing us with the budget processes and the APP discussions in Parliament on the national audits and those entities, but the office has also been busy with MFMA. So that's just the continuum of how we've dealt with matters. Those audits were planned for during March and May 2022. They were executed up until the end of February 2023. The reports tabled up until the end of February 2023, especially some of those that were late because some of the councils did take some time to settle down. And then we've now been in the process of consolidating our analysis and then preparing our general report whilst we've been engaging with the different stakeholders. And that is now leading us towards a tabling. This process is well established. It happens pretty much the same every single year, but I thought it would be useful just to contextualize our different engagements with you, because we see you with different hats on all the time. And that is my input for today, Honourable Chair. I hope it does help to give you a sense of what to expect when we meet with you next week, Wednesday. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, HG. Mahlalela.
Khawuleza.
Ukunqaba mfundini uzosimosha wenze ntoni ngoku?
Qaba. Qaba.
Honorable Chair, you are mute.
I was asking Honorable Mahlalela to mute, and in the process, I did mute myself. So thank you very much, AG, for that presentation. Very detailed, which is trying to inform us of what you come from in terms of understanding your report in the previous audit of 2021. And you have walked us through that previous trail, which sought to aid that reminder, which is keeping us ready at the same time for what we are going to meet come next week, Wednesday, on the work that you have done so far. And importantly, colleagues, the AG has walked us through on the financial side of the audit, MFMA, performance side of such, and key to those, the fact that they are able to send people to visit and look into various areas which have been identified as areas of delivery on such services. Whether you're talking about roads, you're talking about water, you're talking about wastewater treatment sites, all those areas have been somewhat created some kind of a survey which would look into the way of confirmation of how that expenditure has been realized to get closer to the needs of our own communities. And then lastly, into the track of the material regularity as it reflects the actual basis of accountability of those who are supposed to account for the resources which have been assigned at the local government level. That was an input by the AG, which then emphasized the point that you are going to have an outlook of such a financial accountability, which accounts for a first year after elections, as we would know, moving from what she has shown us on the performance of the 257 auditees for the past accounting period, and what we're going to see on Wednesday, and the same number of those who have been somewhat audited. So this item is an item which sought to ready the nation to say this is where we stood in the previous accounting period, looking into that cycle, and as well looking into the ecosystem, how has been the contribution of each individual entity identified as impacting on that accountability ecosystem. So thank you very much, AG. Colleagues, is there anyone who would want to comment on the AG's previous outlook leading to the future, which is currently what they have at hand for us to see come next week. Ndiyavuya Mthunzi Coka, ithetha into yoba nivile. There's one hand from Honorable Singh. Siso, do you want to say anything? Honorable Singh?
No, thank you, Chair. I didn't want to leave you lonely at the top there, as being the only one asking questions. I was waiting for other hands to come up, but I saw nothing, so I hesitated. But then eventually decided to put it up, otherwise you would have closed the meeting. But thank you, AG.
Okay.
Thank you, AG, for this report. And I can tell you, we are looking forward with maybe trepidation to what you're going to present next week, because I just hope that many of these people in the red and blue areas that you've identified under adverse and disclaimed and outstanding audits do not become known as serial offenders, because if they are serial offenders in terms of still remaining there, then something's got to be done drastically. But having said that, Chairperson and AG, I think the issue of consultants, we noted there that 11%, about 1.2, 1.3 billion rand, goes towards consultants. And perhaps the AG can tell us if there's been, a reduction in the use of consultants over the years, and perhaps maybe we can have some kind of exercise to inquire from these municipalities, why do they have to continue using consultants, to the tune of 1.3 billion or so. So that's something that, maybe we need to look at moving forward. The other thing is maybe we also need to get a report sometime from the Office of the AG on the role of internal audit. I mean, one would expect that all of these municipalities have an internal audit function. What are they doing? Are they competent? Because if internal audit does their work in the way they're supposed to do it, it's going to make it much easier and lighter on those from the Office of the Auditor-General. I cannot agree with you more, Auditor-General, when you talk about performance focus. That's my hobby horse, value for money and performance focus. I appreciate the fact that, you're now looking at projects, but we're still finding problems with projects. And, maybe one would need something radical, Honorable Chairperson, as we move forward, where we get civil society, like how you have a jury in court, picked from civil society to assist a judge or a magistrate. Maybe civil society must monitor all the CapEx projects of municipalities, because I think some of the councillors even fail us in carrying out that responsibility, and impacts fail us. So maybe civil society needs to come to the party here and say, here's a capital project to build a stadium. This is how much was budgeted. Check who's been awarded the contract, etc., and give us an independent report. And I think, it'll have a salutary effect, because the people on the ground will be very interested in how their funds are spent. And lastly, Chairperson, I think we perhaps need to engage at some stage with DPME. I spoke in a budget vote the other day because my colleague who sits there was not on it. And this is the department, I think, although they look at national and provincial, but I think their mandate will also go to local performance at local level. So and I found that the political head there was very enthusiastic, wanted to do things, and I don't know to what extent there are interactions between the Office of the AG and the Department of DPME, because they have an overall responsibility of performance monitoring and evaluation of all government expenditure. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Honorable Singh.
Thank you, Chair.
AG, I think, though I have asked for comments, won't like us to anticipate the trends come next week Wednesday. You have asked very pertinent areas for our indulgence, something which I think, and I would want to persuade you to leave that for next week Wednesday, when we get that a kind of a report from the AG, areas of consultants, areas of performance, and what are the indicative trends, whether good or bad. We look into that, and probably what you are saying, maybe for come Wednesday, the AG should look into emphasizing some of the areas which are talking about for our fair understanding and indulgence. Am I getting into your mind, Honorable Singh? I pleading with you in that sense.
No, indeed, Chairperson. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sisu?
Thank you, Chairperson.
Yes.
Thank you, AG. I just want to say, just the emphasis that you put on the proper controls, internal controls, and the issue of the audit itself, clean audit itself. What impresses me most is the issue of municipalities, the manner that you have handled their financials, moving, now they are in yellow zone. They're going to be moving out of that as well. Because this has been the thorn in the flesh of members of parliament, because we have difficulties in ensuring those municipalities are able to account for their money. And I hope next week, when we come back, we'll be able to delve in terms of which municipalities we are talking about here and which municipalities are still in the red. I thought I should do that comment, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Mukota. Thank you so much for the comment. AG, do you want to close off by comment or so?
No, thank you very much, Honorable Chair and Honorable Singh and Honorable Kota. The input certainly helped me anticipate the information preferences and requirements of SCOAC, so I'll make sure that we respond to both inputs at the time that we meet with you on Wednesday, and we'll make sure that you have the report with you and the necessary details so that we can engage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, AG and team. The fact that you see what needs to encourage us is the fact that your office does not fail to account appropriate moments as expected by Parliament, required by legislation, and table those reports. You see that assists us to see where the country at the local level is going. It is within our understanding that everybody, whether you look into the current problems in Tshwane, whether you look into Enoch Mgijima, the problems in our municipalities are driving us towards a singular direction, a direction which seeks to yearn for the proper leadership at that level and required requisite capacity at a managerial level and looking into the stable environment in politics. And all those kinds of things have influence one way or the other in the projections of what you are going to come up with as your report going forward. And in one way to say how that governance at the local level could work for our own communities to benefit appropriately on the service that they ought to deliver to them. So thank you very much for indulging us in this way to warm our appetite for that report come next week, and as well looking forward into the actual tabling of that report to Parliament as we would deliberate on the outcomes. In absence of any other comment, I've only one announcement. I take it as an announcement, though it has been given as an item that relates to the Canada South African Parliament SCOAC visitations. I've had a meeting with the chairperson yesterday, Chair of Chairs, Honorable Frolic, and we have agreed on a number of things which he has had an indication on. So that application must be forwarded. I've spoken with Mr. Mkaji this morning for such application to be forwarded for his attention and their final approval. It's something which we're looking at towards the first week of July, less some kind of finalities which ought to be picked up for the actual maximal use of the time out there. The Office of the Auditor-General has been secured, and they were still awaiting the finalization of the parliamentary leg of that kind of interaction. But the application would have to be forwarded to the Chair of Chairs for us to take that time for interaction. The main issue, as we would know, is what the AG has been dealing with, the matter which relates to the application in as far as the performance is concerned, and the key critical areas which relate to the matters of somewhat covering the Auditor-General going forward, even financing as one of those matters. Is there any other matter, Mr. Vimbe?
Hello, Chair.
Is there any other matter? Yes.
Absolutely not, Chair. It's gonna be a meeting on Wednesday. That is the only thing which I think I need to bring before the attention of the committee. That's gonna be a meeting on Tuesday as planned. However, we will communicate the issue of venue in due course. Parliament has got limited committee rooms, but it's something that we are handling. So the possibility is that the venue can also be communicated over the weekend or earliest next week. It's a matter that we're handling. So I think that's another thing that I should just add.
Tell you more. The date is the 31st, yeah?
Yes, Chair, the meeting starts at 9 on the 31st.
31st, the morning of the day. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah. Colleagues, allow me to thank all those who are in attendance, especially the Office of the Auditor-General, the AG, herself and her team. I think the Deputy AG has been in attendance. Thank you very much, colleagues. Thanks for those who tend to inform our public on these occurrences. Enjoy your weekend. See you next week on the 31st, which is Tuesday. Thank you so much.